May 24th, 1941, 6 o'clock hours. Denmark Strait, 300 miles northwest of Iceland. The tower of flame shot upward from HMS Hood's mainmast, climbing higher than seemed physically possible, painting the gray Arctic dawn orange and red. Then the explosion came, not a sound of force, a pressure wave that rippled across the water and struck the bridge of HMS Prince of Wales like a physical blow. When the smoke cleared 3 seconds later, Hood's stern had vanished. Her bow pointed skyward at 60 degrees, propellers spinning uselessly against empty air. Then she slid beneath the waves, and the largest warship in the world ceased to exist. Finding this gripping? Please like and subscribe to support our untold stories. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community. Now, let's return to the tragedy that shook an empire. Ordinary signalman Ted Briggs, 18 years old, found himself underwater without understanding how he'd gotten there. The compass platform where he'd been standing had simply ceased to exist. Pressure crushed his chest. His lungs screamed. He kicked toward what he hoped was the surface, fought past wreckage and bodies and debris, and broke into freezing air, gasping. Behind him, where HMS Hood had been 42,100 tons, 860 feet long, pride of the Royal Navy for 20 years, there was nothing, just smoke and floating debris and the terrible silence of the ocean closing over 1,415 men. And in that moment, treading water in the Denmark Strait, while hypothermia crept into his bones, Ted Briggs realized something the Admiralty had known for 2 decades, but never admitted. Hood had been a beautiful, magnificent death trap, and everyone who designed her had known exactly how she would die. The mathematics of Hood's doom began not in 1941, but in 1916, in the gray waters off Jutland. May 31st, afternoon watch, when Vice Admiral David Beatty watched 3 of his battlecruisers explode and sink within the span of an hour. HMS Indefatigable went first struck amidships. Magazine detonation, gone in 30 seconds, 1,017 dead. Then HMS Queen Mary 2 salvos from the German battlecruiser Derfflinger, a pillar of flame, and she broke in half, taking 1,266 men down. HMS Invincible lasted until evening. Another magazine explosion, another 1,000 dead in seconds. Beatty turned to his flag captain and delivered the understatement that would define British naval design for a generation. There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today, but there wasn't something wrong with the ships that day. There was something wrong with the entire philosophy that had built them, the idea that speed and firepower could substitute for armor, that battlecruisers could trade protection for velocity, and somehow survive in a stand-up fight with proper battleships. The investigation that followed reached conclusions designed to protect reputations rather than sailors. The real problem was obvious to anyone willing to look. British battlecruisers had sacrificed armor for speed, and German shells had exploited that weakness with ruthless efficiency. But admitting that meant acknowledging that thousands of men had died because the Admiralty had built ships wrong. Easier to blame cordite handling procedures. Easier to mandate anti-flash equipment and magazine protocols. Easier to implement fixes that wouldn't require scrapping an entire class of capital ships or admitting to Parliament that British naval design was fundamentally flawed. Hood's keel had been laid on May 31st, 1916, the first day of Jutland. Construction stopped immediately when news of the disaster arrived. When it resumed in 1917, Hood received 5,000 tons of additional armor, most of it focused on magazine protection and anti-flash precautions. Her belt armor reached 12 inches at maximum thickness. Impressive on paper. Inadequate in reality. The deck armor, the horizontal protection that would stop shells plunging down from long range, remained thin. 3 inches at best over the magazines. In some areas, less than 2. And every naval architect in the Admiralty knew what that meant. In 1920, the year Hood commissioned, the Admiralty built mock-ups representing her armor scheme and fired 15-inch shells at them from various ranges and angles. The results were documented in reports marked secret and filed away. Shells fired from 15,000 yards or more, descending at steep angles, could penetrate Hood's deck armor, pass through internal compartments, and reach her magazines. The reports included diagrams showing exactly how it would happen. They included cost estimates for fixing the problem, roughly £500,000 for comprehensive deck armor upgrades. They included time requirements, 6 months in dry dock. They also included a recommendation that never mentioned cost or time directly, but made the political reality clear. Hood was already the largest warship afloat, a propaganda triumph that had cost £6.025 million, and admitting she needed immediate armor upgrades before entering service would be catastrophic for public confidence and parliamentary budget approval. Better to commission her as is. Better to accept the calculated risk. Better to bet that Hood's speed 31 knots, faster than any battleship afloat, would let her dictate engagement ranges and avoid the plunging fire that could kill her. For 20 years the bet paid off. Hood became the most famous warship in the world, the embodiment of British naval supremacy. The Empire cruise of 1923 to 24 saw her circumnavigate the globe, visiting colonies and dominions, receiving dignitaries and crowds. Over 750,000 people toured the ship during that voyage. School children waved flags. Newspapers ran breathless coverage. Hood was grace and power and empire made steel. But symbols don't stop shells. Engineering does. And Hood's engineering was obsolete by 1930, dangerously outdated by 1940, and absolutely inadequate by 1941 when Germany launched Bismarck, a battleship with 12.6-inch deck armor over her magazines, 4 times Hood's protection. The planned refit told the story of missed chances and deferred decisions. By 1938, the Admiralty had designed comprehensive upgrades for Hood. Remove the obsolete conning tower. Add 5 inches of deck armor over critical areas. Install modern anti-aircraft weapons. Upgrade fire control systems. Improve underwater protection. Total cost, approximately £2 million. Time required, 18 months in dry dock. Scheduled completion, late 1939. Then Germany invaded Poland. Suddenly, Britain couldn't spare any capital ships for extended refits. Hood was too valuable not because she was combat effective, but because she was famous. Removing the symbolic flagship from service would signal weakness to allies and enemies alike, so the refit was postponed. First until 1940, then until 1941, then indefinitely. Hood went to war in September 1939, with 1920s armor facing 1940s weapons. Everyone in the Admiralty knew what that meant. Internal memoranda from 1940, later declassified, acknowledged Hood's protection was marginal against modern German battleships. Flag officers understood that engaging capital ships at long range meant accepting catastrophic risk, but strategic necessities overrode tactical concerns. Britain needed ships at sea, regardless of their flaws, because the alternative conceding control of the Atlantic to the Kriegsmarine was unthinkable. May 1941 brought the crisis to a head. Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugene sailed from Norway, attempting to break into the Atlantic shipping lanes where they could devastate the convoys keeping Britain alive. Intelligence confirmed they'd passed through the Denmark Strait. The Royal Navy had hours, not days, to intercept. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, commanding from Hood's Bridge, received orders to engage. He was 54 years old, a career officer who'd served in the Grand Fleet at Jutland 25 years earlier. He understood exactly what Hood's thin deck armor meant at long range. He also understood that letting Bismarck reach the convoy routes was unacceptable. The orders were clear. The risks were obvious. The choice was already made. Holland planned his approach to minimize Hood's vulnerability. He would close range rapidly, using Hood's superior speed to get inside 12,000 yards where shells would arrive at flatter trajectories, striking belt armor instead of plunging through decks. At close range, Hood's 12-inch belt might protect her. At long range, her 3-inch decks were a death sentence. Everything depended on closing fast before Bismarck could exploit the range advantage. At 5:52 hours on May 24th, with range at 26,500 yards, Holland ordered Hood to open fire. 8 15-inch guns thundered. The Battle of the Denmark Strait had begun. Prince of Wales, following 800 yards astern, opened fire seconds later. Across the gray water, Bismarck and Prinz Eugene turned to engage. The range was exactly where Hood was most vulnerable. Bismarck's gunnery officer understood this as well as Holland did. The German 15-inch guns, among the most accurate in the world, began firing at 26,000 yards. Prinz Eugene's 8-inch guns joined in. The shells climbed into the low clouds and disappeared, then came screaming down seconds later in massive geysers of white water. For 8 minutes, the opposing forces exchanged fire while the range closed. Prinz Eugene scored the first hit, an 8-inch shell that struck Hood's boat deck, starting fires and ready-use ammunition. Damage was manageable. Hood continued maneuvering, attempting to close range faster. Her guns thundered again. Shells straddled Bismarck. One hit struck the German battleship's forward section, causing minor damage. At 6 o'clock hours, with range reduced to roughly 16,500 yards, Bismarck's fifth salvo arrived. Multiple 15-inch shells, each weighing nearly a ton, descending at 12 to 15-degree angles. Officers on Prince of Wales saw them hit. One struck near Hood's mainmast. Then came the explosion. It wasn't sound, it was light. A tower of flame that shot upward from Hood's center section, climbing 200 feet, 300 higher than the mast itself. Then the blast. The pressure wave rolled across the water and struck Prince of Wales's bridge hard enough to knock men off their feet. When vision cleared, Hood's spine was breaking. The entire aft section from mainmast to stern was disintegrating, ripped apart by internal explosions that propagated forward through magazine after magazine. The bow section, oddly intact, tilted upward as the stern sank. For 3 seconds, eyewitnesses on Prince of Wales counted Hood's bow pointed skyward, propellers visible and spinning. Men were visible on the forecastle, tiny figures clinging to railings. Then the bow slid backward and down, and HMS Hood disappeared beneath the Denmark Strait. Ted Briggs surfaced coughing freezing water. Able seaman Bob Tilburn broke the surface 30 yards away, gasping. Midshipman William Dundas appeared moments later, swimming toward floating debris. The 3 of them were the only survivors from 1,418 men aboard. 99.8% casualties. The ship had simply ceased to exist too quickly for anyone else to escape. They clung to debris for over 2 hours while HMS Electra, a destroyer that had been screening the Battlecruisers, raced toward the position. The water temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia set in within minutes. Briggs later recalled feeling warm, then sleepy, then nothing, the classic stages of hypothermia-induced death. Tilburn remembered his vision narrowing to a tunnel. Dundas stopped shivering, which meant his body was shutting down. Electra's crew pulled them aboard at 8:15 hours, barely conscious, core temperatures dangerously low. 2 required immediate treatment for severe hypothermia. All 3 survived, but would carry the psychological weight of being the only 3 who did. Behind them, the Denmark Strait was empty. No wreckage. No bodies. No evidence that the largest warship in the world had existed except for floating debris and an oil slick spreading across gray water. Aboard Prince of Wales, still engaged with Bismarck, the shock was total. 1 minute Hood had been firing, maneuvering, closing range. The next, she was simply gone. Prince of Wales's captain made the only decision that made sense, broke off the action, laid smoke, and withdrew. His ship was brand new, commissioned barely 2 months earlier, with guns still experiencing mechanical failures. Engaging Bismarck alone would accomplish nothing except adding more casualties to the disaster. In London, the Admiralty received the signal at 8 o'clock hours. Hood has blown up. 4 words that changed the war's emotional trajectory. Winston Churchill, informed immediately, reportedly went silent for a full minute. Hood wasn't just a ship. She was a symbol of British naval supremacy, the floating embodiment of empire, the warship every schoolchild knew by name. Her loss was more than tactical. It was psychological, a blow to national confidence that reverberated across Britain and the world. The response was immediate and total. Every available capital ship converged on Bismarck. For 3 days, the Royal Navy pursued the German battleship across the Atlantic. Aircraft from HMS Royal finally crippled Bismarck's steering on May 27th. Battleships, amongst King George V and HMS Rodney, closed in and pounded the German ship into a burning wreck. Bismarck sank with approximately 2,100 crew dead. Revenge for Hood, but revenge that couldn't resurrect 1,415 British sailors who died because their ship had sailed into battle with armor everyone knew was inadequate. The Board of Inquiry convened immediately. The findings were classified secret and remained so for decades. But the conclusions were inevitable and damning. Hood had died from a magazine explosion caused by a shell, probably a single 15-inch projectile that penetrated her deck armor, reached the aft magazine, and detonated roughly 100 tons of cordite and high explosive. The explosion propagated forward, detonating additional magazines, breaking Hood's spine, and causing catastrophic structural failure. Total time from fatal hit to complete sinking, approximately 3 minutes. The inquiry also noted, in carefully neutral language, that Hood's deck armor was insufficient to stop plunging fire at battle ranges exceeding 15,000 yards. This had been known since 1920. The necessary armor upgrades had been designed, costed, and scheduled. They had never been implemented. The reasons were political and financial, not technical. The consequence was 1,415 dead. Modern analysis using computer modeling confirms what 1920s ballistics tests predicted. At 16,500 yards, a 15-inch shell descending at 12 to 15 degrees would penetrate 3 inches of deck armor, pass through internal compartments, and reach magazine spaces. The modeling also shows that adding 3 to 5 inches of deck armor, the upgrade proposed multiple times and never implemented, would have prevented penetration or at least contained the explosion. Hood would have been damaged, possibly severely, but she would have survived. The wreck of HMS Hood was located in 2001 by an expedition led by David Mearns, lying 9,000 feet deep in the Denmark Strait. She rests in 3 major sections spread across 1,500 feet of seafloor. The bow section is inverted but relatively intact. The midship section is catastrophically damaged, plates curled outward by internal explosion. The stern section sank separately, landing upright. The massive conning tower, scheduled for removal in the cancelled 1939 refit, was found over a kilometer from the main wreck, blown clear by the magazine explosion. In 2015, another expedition recovered Hood's bell, a symbolic act approved after years of debate about disturbing a war grave. The bell was restored and unveiled by Princess Anne on May 24, 2016, 75 years to the day after Hood sank. It now rests at the National Museum of the Royal Navy. Polished brass engraved with the ship's name, a memorial to 1,415 men who died when everyone's worst fears came true. Ted Briggs became the keeper of Hood's memory. He wrote books, gave interviews, attended commemorations, spoke to school children about the ship and the men who served aboard her. He never claimed to understand why he survived when 1,415 others didn't. He was simply there, on the compass platform in exactly the right position to be blown clear when the explosion occurred. Chance, not providence. Physics, not fate. Bob Tilburn and William Dundas lived quieter lives, but carried the same weight, the knowledge that their survival was arbitrary, that they lived because of where they'd been standing when the shell hit, nothing more. All 3 attended reunions of HMS Hood Association until age and health prevented it. Briggs died in 2008 at age 85, the last survivor. His final request, that Hood's wreck remain protected, undisturbed except for respectful surveys, a war grave for men who deserved better than the ship they were given. May 24th remains a day of remembrance. 8 bells ring at noon, in naval tradition 4 pairs, marking the change of watch, honoring the dead. The HMS Hood Association maintains records of every crew member, documents their stories, ensures their names aren't forgotten. But remembrance doesn't change mathematics. Britain spent £6.025 million building Hood. The ship served 21 years. The proposed refit would have cost £2 million and might have saved her. The Admiralty chose not to spend it, not because the money didn't exist, but because admitting Hood needed protection meant admitting she'd been inadequate all along. That admission was politically impossible. So Hood sailed to the Denmark Strait with known vulnerabilities, engaged Bismarck at the exact range where those vulnerabilities were fatal, and died precisely how her designers had predicted in 1920. The ratio is brutal. Roughly 1,400 pounds saved per life lost. In any rational accounting, that's catastrophic failure. But naval warfare isn't rational. It's political, strategic, operational, constrained by resources, driven by necessity, gambling lives against outcomes nobody can predict with certainty. Hood's deployment in May 1941 wasn't irrational given Britain's position. It was desperate pragmatism. Deploy the famous ship, regardless of flaws, because letting Bismarck operate freely was unacceptable. But the tragedy is that the desperation was unnecessary. If Hood had been properly upgraded in 1939, or 1935, or 1920, she could have engaged Bismarck on equal terms. The vulnerability was fixable. The fix was affordable. The consequence of not fixing it was absolute. On the morning of May 24, 1941, HMS Hood carried 1,418 men who trusted the Royal Navy had built a ship capable of protecting them. 9 minutes later, 3 survived to tell the story. The rest died instantly or drowned as compartments flooded in seconds. No bodies were recovered. No wreckage contained remains, just empty ocean and the terrible silence of water closing over the largest warship in the world.